Hi, Mystery Writers. Whoa, today I wanted to talk in the studio about telling time in your story. It's a small detail, but a really important detail. I know I've talked about setting and having your characters floating in space, so you need to ground them in where they are. But you also need to let your readers know what time it is in your story. Um, it's part of the setting, and you need to let readers know where they are in time in the scene. So it's the same way you ground them in the physical setting. You want to let them know what what time it is, and it's not a big important thing. It's just something you need to mention so they don't question where they are in time. You want to set up those time markers in your scene. Um, And the easiest way to do this is for you to do some prep beforehand, and that is to create a timeline for your story. You can use paper, you can create a digital file. There's software like Aeon Timeline, or you can create a timeline in Plotter in order to uh, create your story events in sequence and know what day it is. And this is often important, especially in mysteries. You want to know the time since the crime occurred, and if there's any outside pressure deadline that your sleuth has, you want to know how much time is left before they have to come up with a solution. So it can be very important. You want to know what the story events are and when they happen. Um, and it helps if you do every story event in your story. Um, um, some writers actually add backstory events to their timeline just so they're clear about when something that happened before the story begins, when it happened, so they can reference that too. So you and your reader know when a past events happened. Um, and you can keep track of it. So if you reference a time, say your protagonist's parent died 10 years ago, and then you reference it later on in your story, you want to make sure that it's always 10 years ago. Um, just little details like that. And it also helps if you know for major story events, you know the time of day, morning, noon, evening, night, um, and some weather details. And these help ground your reader as well, all right? Having a timeline, setting up that timeline helps you keep from overlapping events where two things happen at the same time in your story, which couldn't happen in real life, all right? Like your character traveling in unrealistic time limits. Um, so your story calendar will help you insert time markers into your scenes with a realistic time progression. So let's talk about telling time. First of all, when we think of time, we think of clocks, and that's a really obvious way and a useful way to use time with your reader. Some stories, especially crime fiction, use the date and time as chapter headings or subheadings. Robert Harris, for instance, starts each chapter of Pompeii with the date and the Roman hour. um, in the narrative, a character can glance at a clock or a watch, um, and this action builds tension when the character is working against a deadline. And I should also mean in this day and age, they can glance at their phone as well. All right. Um, but establishing that time for your reader works best with a subtle use of time markers that hint at the time without guiding the reader to look at the clock, as it were. So, how do you tell time without a clock? Right? Your story still needs those time markers so the reader understands the passage of time. And without time indications, readers become confused, stop reading, and they may even turn back in your story to try and figure out what time it is or how much time has passed since a past event. And one thing you don't want your readers to do is stop reading. So you want to make it clear without belaboring the point. All right. So as a writer, you can get caught up in action and dialogue and forget about the time markers. So it's something you can check when you're going through and editing your first draft. The practical way to help readers is to start each scene with a time reference, like that afternoon or the next morning, something like that. Then in the middle of that scene, you can add a second time marker. So you can say something like, now it was only 30 minutes until X is going to happen, or something like that. You can use events in your story, both past and future, to remind readers of the passage of time. Is the train leaving in so many hours, minutes, days, and or how close is your sleuth to their deadline? So if you mention that an upcoming event will happen in a certain amount of time, like a week, readers will know a week has passed when you get to that scene. So that you just help your readers understand time passage. So first of all, you have transitions. Transitions from one scene to the next can be short or long, like exactly 28 hours after Mike received the telegram, or the next morning, or that night, are all examples of short transitions that help your reader understand what happened since the last scene. And now, if there's a long break in between scenes, you may want a little bit longer passage um, to help your reader navigate that time passage. For instance, for the next month, Axel discovered nothing. He filled out papers, caught up on reports, and hated what he thought was time-wasting activities. No one called. He'd followed all the leads, but you show what your protagonist has been doing during that long passage of time, and it helps your reader understand why nothing happened in the story between the last scene and the next scene, because all that happened with your protagonist was they were doing something, but nothing was really happening for the story. I hope that made sense. You can also use what I call the seasonal clock, and so that's winter, spring, summer, fall, to ground your reader in time and also provide setting details. So seasonal details like rain or snow or heat or blooming trees or falling leaves help your reader see and feel your character's surroundings. And also, sports are seasonal and a good reference for the season. Andy watched Andy switched from track to cross country skiing as the days shortened, something like that. All right. Daily activities are subtle time markers. When a character acts in a natural daily activity, readers instantly know the time of day. All right. Eating breakfast, lunch, or dinner, the reader has an approximate time of day for those activities. Heading to school or to work, or heading back from school or work, or an evening cocktail, or children in the playgrounds after school, or getting ready for bed. All of these are like daily activities that let your reader understand what time of day it is. And amazingly enough, distance is another way to mark time in your story. Your characters need to go from one place to another, and when characters and readers know how far away a destination is, they know how long the journey will take. But readers need to know how your character travels. So, are they going by car, by boat, by truck, by plane, by train, by horseback, by mule cart? So, you're going to have a sense of how long that transportation is going to take them to travel that distance. So, you can also indicate your character's response to travel. Are they tired and cranky or invigorated at the journey's end? Michael Connelly keeps his characters moving in heavy LA traffic and by car and or plane to outlying suburbs or Las Vegas. So he uses that a lot in his stories, the traveling time. So you can also have time inclusion, accuracy, and consistency. That's what you want when you're dealing with time in your story. Um, you help your readers understand what time it is and the time sequence in your story, and they'll be clear about how scenes relate to each other in a time progression. All right. So keep your time references accurate as they relate to other events in your story. Make sure your characters move in a realistic time frame. You don't want your reader wondering how your hero got from point A to point B in an unrealistic time frame. Readers notice things like that. All right, so show your reader how your character was delayed or how the flight went smoothly. And use time markers consistently. You should have at least one in every scene so the reader knows the time progressing through the story. Um, if you keep if you skip time markers for several scenes or even chapters, your reader may get lost and do that thing you don't want them to do, and that is stop reading to go back and check and see what time it is in your story. So, from clock time to seasonal references, time markers ground your reader in your story. So, time is a very important detail for your story. It doesn't have to be big, it just has to be there. So don't forget, it's a great thing to check when you are editing your manuscript. And as you go through your scenes, make sure there's some kind of little time reference in every scene. Okay, I hope that helped. Thank you for being here. And don't forget to subscribe and come back next week for another session in the Mystery Writers Studio. Thank you.